Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Before we get started with the episode, I want to tell you about a new ebook available on our website called Buyer Beware. Why do they keep trying to sell you that annuity? This ebook covers the various types of annuities, negatives to owning annuities, and better investment alternatives to annuities. To download this ebook, you can click the link in the episode notes or go to wiserinvestor.com and you'll find it at the bottom of the page. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Wiser Retirement Podcast. We believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith. Guiding you to financial freedom today are my co-hosts, Michaela Dowdy and Missie Beach.
Hi, Casey.
Hey.
Hello. So, we have both of you. Have we done this before? Have we had both of you on the same time?
Never.
No, we
This is very dangerous for me. I could be cornered very easily.
Watch out.
Watch out. Today, we're going to talk about the very sensitive topic of divorce and how finances affect divorce. Missy, you're a certified divorce
Financial analyst. CDFA.
CDFA. Good. We have a whole new website just for you now.
I know. Thank you.
I know, right?
Appreciate that.
I don't even get my own website, I don't think. What the heck?
You get pilots. You get business owners.
I know, but it has all of this. Just the divorce page just about you. I mean, This is
okay.
super high profile.
That's awesome.
Man.
I don't know what I
I
did.
got to know the right people around here.
Talk to someone.
So, Missy, your marriage experience is 23 years.
Yes, sir.
That's impressive. 23 years and running.
Yeah.
2 boys.
Going strong. All good.
One in college.
One in college, one in high school. So this is not really applicable to me, but I talk a lot about it with my clients.
Yes.
So
Michaela is about to get married. We post this on April 24th. You'll be getting married when?
April 22nd.
22nd. So there's nothing you can say on this podcast that will alter how anyone feels about you getting married on the 22nd.
True.
Michaela will be a married woman. I love it.
Already locked in.
That's right. So I guess, there's a couple of ways we can take this. One is you're about to get married. So you think about combining of accounts. Dave Ramsey always talks about your money gets married too, just like you're physically getting married, but your money gets married. We do meet quite a few people that have accounts that are separate, right? And this is how we always did it. And I don't think that's the best. That's the best way to be successful going forward.
Hard.
If you're marrying someone that's just super bad with money and they have to have a separate account, I would say maybe that's a warning sign.
Yeah, red flag.
You're going to be married to a broke person your entire life. That's not a good way to get started at all. But we make excuses. We think there's no one else, that has to be my person, right? Lots of reasons as to how we get stuck in situations. But what's interesting to me, Missy, is that we never work with divorced men. How come it's always women we work with?
Well, maybe this is a stereotype, but I feel like the men think that they know it all and they're in charge and they've done it their way their entire lives and they don't need help. Whereas I feel like the women in the relationship oftentimes are the ones that are kind of kept in the dark, whether that's intentionally or whether they're just preoccupied running the household or perhaps working and running the household. So they don't have time to be plugged into the family finances. And that's just kind of fallen on the male side of the chore chart.
Right.
And so these women, once they're divorced, it's like a moment of panic, like, holy cow, I just don't know what's gone on my entire married life, because obviously they were independent women before they got married and handled their own bill paying, their savings, and were very capable women. They're well educated and know what to do going into it. But then once they get divorced, they just feel helpless.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things. One is if you're looking for advice, financial advice during divorce, you need to start it maybe even before you sit down and have the conversation that you're getting divorced.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, because I've seen so many there's so many bad attorneys. People think that you hired an attorney and all the attorneys are the same, and they're not. Even the ones that are charging $500 an hour, you can find really bad ones who don't get it. And attorneys and this is another stereotype, but they're really bad with money.
Well, no. Well, they went to school to learn the law.
Yes. No, not really bad money necessarily like in their personal finances, but I'm just saying they're bad at math. That's probably a better way to say it. Mm-hmm. Like 1 + 1 does not always equal 2 to them, and I don't understand why.
No. And just dividing assets in half doesn't work either.
Right.
I mean, they don't know the tax implications of giving each spouse this or that and what it means long term and the cost basis of things and how pensions play out. It's just not a concept that they've been educated on, and nor should they be expected to understand, I guess, just like we don't understand the law completely. So I think that's the thing to get across to clients is that your attorney is not your full team. You really need a financial advisor, a CDFA on your team, and the earlier the better. And you're right, Casey. You need someone before you even approach your spouse about the divorce, because you need to gather all the financial statements, all the tax records, and you need to file that away on a thumb drive and get the records that you need prior to approaching that spouse, because sometimes your access may be cut off and who knows what is going to happen once, the gauntlet is thrown.
Right. Well, let's talk about reasons how finances affect divorce. Number one, I on the list is opposing attitudes on how to handle money.
Yeah, that's a big one. Spouses, you may have been raised in totally different types of families. One may be very open and talking about money, and one may be very closed mouth, where it's kind of a taboo topic where no one wants to talk about, where money comes from, how it flows into the household, or how bills are paid, or how much things cost. And, things just kind of magically happen, and bills are paid and vacations are taken. So, I think that's a conversation that young couples need to have before they're married. I don't know, Michaela, is that part of like premarital counseling or?
Oh, definitely. I mean, finances are one of the leading causes of divorce, as we've seen over and over again. So it really is something that's so important to have a conversation about beforehand. And so it's been one of me and my fiance, it's been one of our like top conversations together, and just like walking through, because it is something opposites oftentimes attract. And that is even true of money. And so that is something where it's knowing like, okay, who's a more spontaneous spender? Where do we find joy in what we're spending money on? Because, really is like what you're spending your money on is where like your treasure's also at, and those kinds of things. And so it's really big on like, my fiance loves to buy concert tickets. Thank goodness he loves $20 concerts. But like, like the spontaneous spender of that, whereas I'm like the spontaneous spender if I need a coffee, so it's like understanding that a little bit, but then also understanding, okay, I'm also more of a security person. Like I want to make sure that at the top of, the month when I get my paycheck, that there's also, a set amount going into savings. And so like, that's like pay yourself first method. And so it's walking through that together and understanding, okay, we've came from different households that have talked about money in different ways. And my household was very, I would say like transparent with our finances. And I was able to really understand finances from an early age. Like at 9, I was already, on a budget for my like back to school spending. So I had a certain amount I was allowed to spend on school clothes, school supplies, and all of that. And I had to budget it myself. And so that's something that like was very open and transparent with me from the beginning of, hey, you're only going to have this amount. Mm-hmm. And you've got to figure out how to live on it kind of thing. And so I think that was something that is kind of different, I think, in our upbringings a little bit of just like I had that transparent background. And so it is knowing how to understand your goals, though, as a couple. And I think that's what's huge is like you have to come together as a couple and say, okay, what are our main goals and how are we going to achieve those? And at the end of the day, as long like if you know what your end goals are and you can both rally behind those end goals, then like that's the important thing. And like really being able to, I believe where the joint accounts come into such a big play is like you're able to hold each other accountable to those goals. So like if he sees that, you know, I've spent $30 at Starbucks that week, he's going to be like, hey, like, why are we buying a coffee every day? Are you having a rough week? Or like, do I need to support you in some way? Or is it like, hey, or, you know, maybe we need to cut back because you're getting a little excited, but you know, like those kinds of things. So it's kind of trying to figure out like having that balance of, you know, freedom within yourself and not feeling like, oh, I need to clear every purchase through my person, but also like understanding that you have that balance, that like goal that you're trying to go towards together, and like you both need to be working towards that. And I think that actually ultimately brings you closer as a couple if you're doing it in a way that you're respecting one another.
That's a really good point, or a really good reason to have a joint account is that it encourages communication and like, why are you making these purchases? Is there like an underlying reason? And is there something I can do to support you? So I love that takeaway from it. And I might add that I know Michaela has already done her long-term financial plan. So last week she sat down and did her and Drew's long-term financial plan. So going into the marriage, everything is very intentional and they have a plan for savings and retirement goals. So I think that one's getting off on the right foot.
That's impressive.
Because I know another thing that can also affect divorce is when you have mismatched financial priorities. And so if you don't have a good long-term financial plan, you know, there are no priorities and everything, you know, you just spend and pay bills and you don't have, you know, intentionality behind what you do. So you've got to set priorities.
Yeah, that's the part that we see in couples that don't have priorities set. That's why we work in family goals and legacy planning into our financial planning process, is to help get people on the same path. And you know, I've had meetings that we didn't get into any numbers. It was just really hashing out how people feel differently about finances or the goals or money. Mm-hmm. You know, husband wants to spend, and wife wants to know that there's a safety net, right? And so you have to kind of talk to both of them in their own language to get them to understand in the middle. So probably finance with a counseling minor, psychology minor
point, yeah.
would be something very useful. I mean, people joke about that, but I feel like I'm able to do it from 23 years of experience working with 400 plus families. Ages you. Not physically necessarily, but ages you from the fact that you've seen so many different aspects of people's lives, that you can then take that information and then spread wisdom to the others who are struggling.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, we talk about this almost every episode, but credit card debt, you know, you just can't, it's like cancer in a relationship, right?
Yeah, it is. And you know, when clients come in with credit card debt, it's funny because we talk about, you know, you're too rich to have this much debt. And I'll ask clients, you know, like, well, where did this debt come from? How did you rack this up? And so many times, you know, I'd say maybe 8 times out of 10, they don't know. They don't have a good answer. You know, sometimes
it's not medical debt.
Yeah, sometimes it's medical debt. Sometimes it might be like home renovations, or there'll be a solid answer. But more often than not, like, they just don't know. They're like, oh, it just happened.
Yeah.
And so
$20 at a time, probably.
Yeah,
But
that's when there's an issue. And I think that's when couples get into trouble, when it just starts spiraling. And
Well, it's interesting is to watch the dynamic, because they'll say, well, I have $5,000 on my card. How much is on your card?
yes.
I'm like, how do you not know that?
And why is it his and her card?
Yes,
you
exactly.
know? That's
Yeah.
what gets me. I'm like, well, we just have a joint card that we use basically for everything,
Right.
pay it off every month. And so when it gets into this his and hers, you get the finger pointing.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talk about, well, let's pay him off. And there's a conversation, well, you know, I'll use my bonus to pay off my card. And, you know,
Yeah.
what are you going to do for your card?
Your money needs to get married as well as you.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that goes on to like, it's kind of a weird term, but financial infidelity. It's like when you're making purchases behind the other person's back and they don't know it, and you're trying to avoid the conflict. And I've had people before say, "Hey, I've got this, but don't tell my spouse." I'm like, no, we kind of need to lay it out there on the table and just say this is where we are and go from there. And I'd love to know what the conversations are when they leave here, because some people are good at putting up a front, but I'm sure when they get in the car, it's not a pleasant drive home. But they come back, so
They do.
obviously it's a good process for them to go through. But
Which
yeah, you just need to be on the same page. you know?
Definitely. Which I think is also why you have the joint bank accounts are so much of this hesitant topic for couples, is because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, if we're separate, we avoid the conflict.
Right.
And instead it actually just causes more tension, because you're like, well, where'd your money go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How much money do you actually have? And then all of a sudden you're separated in that way. And it's like,
I've seen people married for 10 plus years and they're still splitting the mortgage.
yes.
I do know, couples like that.
Like second marriages, married when you're much older. I mean, some of that kind of is like, okay, we just kind of fell into this habit, but we can make changes. And they all typically say that. They say, well, this is what we do, but if you have a better option, then we'll do that. It's like, well, we got to change the ship for retirement, because typically retirement resources are coming from one person, not as much as two people. But yeah, it just doesn't make sense. It's not about his and hers. It's more about you together, and how can you be successful together. Overextending budgets is another reason for financial or how finances affect divorce. You sit down, you write a budget, and then you keep blowing that budget every single month. That is going to create tension.
Yeah,
Right.
and I feel like a big driver of that is overbuying on the primary residence. Some young couples just really want that dream house and do it too early. And then they realize they're in over their heads and just never can dig out from that.
You see that a lot. You see there's a house, it's sort of in my neighborhood. It's a little outside, I guess. Same neighborhood, I guess, according to the map. But they built this monstrosity of a home, and they got divorced in the process.
Oh.
And I don't know these people, but you kind of like, oh, get it. Building a home is very stressful, and somebody probably wanted this, and there wasn't enough money, and it got sold before it was even completed.
Yeah, custom home building is not for the faint of heart. I mean, yeah.
But yeah, so major impulses, buys, financial disagreements. That's what you kind of went back to, Michaela. You come home and say, I bought a car. Right? Now, some families can do that.
Right.
Some families can do that because there's plenty of wealth to go around. Buying a car is not a major financial decision in the end.
Right.
For some
In
people.
some families.
In some families.
Correct.
Yeah. But you came home and decided to do something really big and without consulting your spouse. It probably is going to make them feel like they've just been left out. They're along for the ride, I guess. Well, he bought that, whatever. I had a conversation with someone yesterday who just decided to retire. That's a major financial decision. Probably going to have a struggle probably going to struggle getting their home paid off like we originally designed. But the phone call was, hey, I retired.
Oh,
I was just done.
yeah.
Quit his job.
Had enough.
Now, I assumed you talked with her about it, but I could tell there was hesitation on her part.
Yeah.
Right. So, so you have to be, you have to understand that you marry somebody, you're doing this together. And if you're not going to do it together, just get divorced.
Just kidding.
Find somebody you can do it together with. You know, I mean, it's, I can't imagine living with that much tension.
No, that would make your life miserable. You're right. If you can't work together and make decisions together, why be together?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The Casey Smith method. Get divorced. Not that you personally follow it.
Stress from combining bank accounts. This goes back to you. I think you combine operating accounts, but you always have that reserve. It would still be in joint, but that reserve account, I think that might be maybe that's a golden rule. It's like you can spend you're saving your money in your retirement accounts. You can spend down your operating account, so to speak. But that reserve, you have to pull money out of reserve, then you probably should say, hey, we had to pull $7,000 out of savings this month. You know, someone needs to be on top of that.
Yeah. Like, I find it stressful to be the one managing the finances in the family too. So I think something that couples need to discuss is, even if one is managing the finances, there needs to be like a monthly check-in or some sort of communication for the non-financial spouse. So like John and I sit down once a month, and even though he's not the bill payer or the investment person, you know, I just give him a little update and say, this is where we are. Our investments are up or down. And here's our, you know, operating expenses for the month and, you know, tuition paid, whatever. And, you know, drew out of emergency reserves for these one-time expenses. Because otherwise I feel like, oh, the whole burden is on me, you know, and I'm the one stroking the big checks and, you know, it's our money, but like, don't let one spouse carry that financial burden for the entire couple. You know, make sure everybody's clued in on where that is. And I think that takes a lot of stress out of it and keeps everybody, you know, with that same information.
I've always heard people say, make it kind of a fun thing. You know, go to a nice restaurant, someplace quiet,
yes.
and say, here's
public.
Yeah, right. To someplace, that you can kind of push a piece of paper over and say, this is the status of where we are. We need to make decisions. And I mean, and from your standpoint, though, I'm sure those are mostly positive decisions where some people have to have hard discussions of like, we keep spending more money than we make, or credit card keeps going up. We're going to have to cut back. And then it becomes accusing each other of, well, you spent that money, and then it becomes a public argument at that point. So maybe that isn't the best place to do this. I remember a long time ago, I asked what budgeting meant, and she told me that means we can't do anything. Oh. And so sometimes you have to figure out the same language, right? How do you speak the same language? Like, no, I think budgeting just means every dollar has a purpose.
Yes.
That's all that means. It's like every dollar has its home. And sometimes that home is just something fun. So then that's fine.
You're right. Budgeting can be like a bad connotation to some people. They think of it as very restrictive.
Right. Yeah. So it's I think also too, for young people, middle-aged people, everybody getting married, really, just everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
Is understanding what you're marrying financially. Are you marrying someone that's got $150,000 of school debt? That's a big bill to overcome. It doesn't mean that you don't marry the person. It just means that you have a game plan that you've established to say, well, we got to get rid of this, and we're gonna get rid of this together.
Right.
Because if you get married with nothing, any extra dollar you have is both of yours. Is how the court looks at it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not his and hers. If you're married and you make $300,000, your wife makes $0, Court sees it as you make $150,000 each, right? It's equal. So that's how you have to look at it going forward. So how are you going to tackle that debt together? Now, if it's a new marriage, I always tiptoe into that conversation, because if you're looking to take the saver's money to pay off the person who's in debt, you're literally transferring premarital assets
Yes.
to pay off someone else's bill. So you have to kind of tiptoe into that and kind of have an idea of like, okay, does this look like this is legit, or are they here in front of me because this is not going to be, I remember a long time ago, I had a couple and they got themselves into a pickle with the IRS, self-employed situation, not enough taxes paid. And I remember looking at them going, I'll get you out of the mess. It's going to take us a few months. We'll have to write some letters. We're going to get through this. If you guys get divorced over this, I quit. Because I could see the tension it was creating. And that comment really caught them off guard, but they didn't get divorced. They're still happily married. And they're still, they've been clients here for very, very many decades now at this point. So ultimately, it's communication and tackling the problem together, no matter how you got there.
Exactly.
You want something different for yourself. It goes back to the theme. Financial success is intentional.
Intentional, yes.
And just having random credit card statements show up and, oh, I bought this or I bought that, and there's no restraint, there's a problem, right?
And it's definitely important to have the conversation of what does each person in the relationship feel towards debt? Because some people were raised where it's like, okay, yeah, we took out a loan for everything. We bought everything
credit cards
on,
is a big deal.
Yeah, bought everything on layaway, like the whole 9 yards.
That's true.
And so it is so important to understand, like, okay, are you a person who thinks like, I only want a mortgage as debt and I don't want to touch anything else and credit cards will be paid off immediately? Or are you someone who's, ready and willing to have extra debt lying around, have the credit card debt that rolls over to the next month, and, have the $45,000 car loan that you're paying $700 on a month? Like, what kind of spender or what kind of debt tolerance do you have? And as a couple coming together and finding your compromise, or seeing you're on the same page, and kind of figuring out what that number is for you, or what that debt is for you that you're comfortable with, and like having that established ahead of time before you're all of a sudden someone's just swiping the card for credit cards and you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I think with younger people, they come in for validation a lot of times. They say, oh, look at this, look at all this. And they're in great shape. Much better shape than I was ever in their 20s. But they go, but our friends are doing so much more. And you have to get yourself out of the comparison game. You're going to have to say, no, your friends are probably have tons of debt.
Yeah.
Or they're starting to accumulate debt. They're living they're on their ski tips, they're on the little bit, spending too much money. And so you just have to stay within yourselves.
Definitely.
And then, if you can't keep up with people, then you got to change your social circle a little bit if it's becoming a problem.
Yes, you're right. I feel like those young couples always ask, like, where do I stand compared to other people our age? And we always say, like, there is no average. There is
right.
There's no way to do that. And I always say, you are great as long as you don't have debt, keep your mortgage and then just no debt. And like you were just saying, Casey, like those people you see around you with all these fancy things, there's no way that they can, buy all these things and not have debt.
Right.
And it costs money to have debt. And you just spiral into this dark hole when you are trying to service all that debt.
Right.
So in the long run, when you get towards retirement, you're going to be the ones retiring early with the nice things.
Right.
So it's going to flip-flop. So just keep doing what you're doing.
Right. So I'll put you on the spot, Missy. Obviously, you work very closely with Michaela, but as she's entering this new phase in her life financially, what is your best advice for her? Looking back on you and John and what you guys have experienced, what would you say is your best advice?
Well, I think that they're already doing all the right things. And I think the best thing that John and I did was making everything joint and everything very transparent. You know, there was no his and hers once we got married. The only his and hers were retirement accounts, which are obviously individual accounts and have to stay that way. But like I was just explaining, how we sit down once a month. And obviously, Michaela is the financial person in the relationship, just like I am, which, you know, in some families is very non-traditional to be the female as in that role. And, you know, at the beginning, John was like, oh, I don't care. You know, you just handle it. And I was like, no, you need to know. Because in the early years, I thought it was stressful, you know, when, you know, things were tight and, you know, we're making tuition payments and the mortgage payment. And I'm like, I can't just have this burden myself, you know, like we make it happen, but like we were just skating by. And so I'm like, I have to share it with you. I have to show you where the dollars are going. So just sit down with Drew every month and just keep him apprised of where everything is. And then it's just a habit. And like Casey was saying, yeah, go out to dinner and do it. And that makes it a forced date night. And then it's kind of fun. But you already have your long-term plan done. And that was like right. So exciting. I was like, oh, Michaela, of course you did it.
So how stressful is planning a wedding and finances?
So we've actually been really blessed in the sense of our families have been really great, and they've actually taken that burden like off of us. And so they've been the ones to really fit the bill on everything, which has been really great. So really, as far as us going into marriage, I feel like we're really set up for success in that. It's just like we don't have that overlaying debt of a potential wedding and those kinds of things. And so it has been great to really get to walk into this next season and just know that we get to like build upon like our already like laid financial picture. And so it has been great that we have great families that have been able to participate that way.
What would you think would change if you didn't have that? Would you be willing to sacrifice wedding festivities in order to keep it within budget, or does a girl want what a girl wants?
Oh, well, y'all would laugh. My original
Drew kind of strikes me as a person to be like, yeah, I got a courthouse, it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's so funny because genuinely my first idea for how I wanted to do our wedding was, I was like, let's just get a really big cabin in like Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We're going to get married in January, and we're going to have like 50, 60 people there, which is just mainly family and like very immediate friends. And we'll eat, you know, off of like paper plates almost. Like it would be very like casual. And everyone was like, you'll regret it. Don't do that.
Oh, wow.
And so they're like, you're a big wedding person. You're a big wedding person. And I was like, am I? Okay. And so now we're doing this big wedding, which is great. And it's going to be absolutely stunning and beautiful. My mom has worked so hard to make it absolutely stunning. So it'll be phenomenal. But definitely, yeah, I would have done the small wedding, and it would have been probably.
If budget was a.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. It's amazing what people spend on weddings now. I think Sea Island has. I think they're down to probably $150,000 minimum or something like that. It's crazy.
I'm not surprised.
Palmetto Bluff, same kind of a setup down there as well.
Well, you just have the insane markups the moment you find out, like whoever the vendor is finds out it's a wedding. It's like skyrocket.
Interesting.
So I don't know, but
yeah, I can't imagine people come out with school debt, but then statistically people have all this wedding debt. You got to pay for the wedding. And then there's a 50% chance that the wedding doesn't even work out statistically, right? Now the older you get,
better.
Is it getting better?
It is getting better, which I think is probably just people aren't getting married as much. But I think
that's smart.
The like later 20 something, like the I don't know, more recent marriages has been
like 40%.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower.
That's a big change. Good.
All right. Well, good conversation. Anything else you guys want to add?
No, just communicate.
Communication's everything. Got to be ready to compromise.
meet in the middle somewhere. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management or want to schedule a consultation to meet with Missy or myself, you can do so by going to wiserinvestor.com, or you can click on the link in the episode notes. Thanks again. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced and edited by Ken Hoadley.